Monica Albright's bright yellow windbreaker seemed to glow in the artificial lighting of Crosswind Regional Airport. The garment looked almost out of place amidst the subdued blues and grays of the terminal. At 12 years old, Monica clutched her boarding pass with a mix of anticipation and nerves, feeling both excited and slightly anxious about flying alone. She had done it before, but only once, and never without a chaperone assigned by the airline. This time, her parents had entrusted her to manage on her own for most of the process. They had drilled her on every detail, from security lines to gate numbers, from polite greetings to who to call in an emergency. Yet all the training in the world couldn't prepare her for the sudden confrontation that was about to unravel. A tall security officer loomed before her, his brows knitted together with suspicion. The name on his badge read Officer Byrne, and the scowl on his face looked as though it had been permanently etched there. Monica was only trying to ask which way to go to find her connecting gate, but something about her question, or maybe something about her appearance, seemed to have sparked more than annoyance. In the span of a single minute, confusion had turned into accusations, and Monica found herself at a loss for words. As Officer Byrne scrutinized her ticket, an uneasy weight settled in Monica's stomach. She had a creeping feeling that the situation was about to spin wildly out of control.
And it did.
With a sudden, abrupt movement, the officer tore her ticket in half, his booming voice echoing across the concourse. "This isn't valid. You're not boarding any flight today." The hush that fell over the nearby travelers was immediate and unsettling. Monica, though her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might crack through her ribs, managed to keep her wits just enough to reach into her backpack for her phone. She dialed the number she'd had memorized since she was 6, the number she was only supposed to use in an emergency. Into the phone, she quietly uttered 4 words that would send shockwaves through the entire Bureau of Federal Safety. "Dad, I need you." Leon Graham, age 47, strode briskly down a hallway in the Bureau of Federal Safety's massive headquarters in Washington, D.C. He held a position that drew both respect and scrutiny in equal measure, Secretary of the BFS. In an era of intense debate around national security and civil liberties, every decision he made was subject to analysis from officials, politicians, and the public. Yet that morning, Leon's mind wasn't on any policy meeting. He was thinking about his daughter Monica, who was flying back from a short visit to see her grandmother in Houston. Normally, her mother would have traveled alongside her, but an unexpected call to perform urgent volunteer medical work abroad had changed their plans. Monica had insisted she was old enough to handle the journey, and Leon, after verifying airline procedures, had agreed. "Sir, your meeting with the Defense Council starts in 10, reminded his assistant, pivoting around him with a notepad. "Reschedule it," Leon said, not missing a step. "I want to be at the arrival gate when Monica lands." His assistant's eyes widened. Few people dared to postpone a Defense Council meeting, but nodded quickly. Leon set off for the next corridor, phone in hand, glancing at the time. Monica's flight was supposed to land in an hour. He'd planned to leave soon to meet her. Instead, his phone vibrated, and the name on the display sent a tiny spark of paternal relief through him: Monica. He expected a simple question or a cheerful "Hi, Dad." Instead, when he answered, he heard the tremor in his daughter's voice as she explained that a security officer had confiscated her boarding pass and refused to let her through. Then he heard an unfamiliar male voice in the background, sharp and dismissive, telling Monica she was lying. Leon's posture stiffened. He felt both fear and anger rising, and he had to force himself to keep a steady tone as he told Monica to hand the phone to the officer. On the other end, he could just make out frantic murmurs. Then a woman's voice came on the line, presumably a supervisor, trying to defuse the situation, but the damage had been done. As soon as Leon ended the call, he signaled to his security detail. "We need to go to Crosswind Regional right now." As the BFS secretary's motorcade navigated the city streets, local airport officials scrambled to contain a situation that had already grown beyond their control. Word spread swiftly among travelers who had witnessed the scene in the terminal. A young black girl, traveling alone, had her ticket destroyed by an officer who claimed it was fraudulent. The murmuring crowd parted as Monica stood near the checkpoint, hugging her backpack, tears threatening to spill but not quite falling. She felt more furious than frightened now, angry that she'd been dismissed as if her entire presence was somehow illegitimate. Officer Byrne stood off to one side, arms crossed, already receiving a lecture from his supervisor, an older woman named Superintendent Halpern. He looked defensive and refused to meet Monica's gaze. Halpern, meanwhile, was on the phone, receiving half-shouted instructions from airport administration. The chatter abruptly shifted into a tense hush as Leon Graham arrived. He moved with determined speed past the waiting lines of travelers, flanked by 2 BFS agents who were trying to keep the crowd at a distance.
"Monica," Leon called.
The moment he saw his daughter was safe, he exhaled a sharp breath. She bolted into his arms and clung to him. Leon held her tight, then straightened to his full height, turning his gaze on the group of officials who had gathered. "Who did this?" he asked quietly, as Monica's phone lay in her small hand, still unlocked to the screen where she dialed him in desperation. The weeks that followed would reveal layers of problems within airport security. They would shake not only the local system at Crosswind Regional but also overshadow BFS policies nationwide. Yet at the heart of the incident was something personal and profoundly unsettling. A young girl made to feel that she, and she alone, was suspicious simply because she didn't match someone's assumptions of who should be flying unaccompanied. Back at the Graham family home, Monica sat curled in an armchair, replaying the day's events in her head. Still wearing that bright yellow windbreaker, she sighed and pulled a blanket over her knees. Her father was in his office on an urgent call, her mother Sylvia in the middle of a frantic series of texts to close family members who'd heard about the incident. The news stations had already begun cycling coverage, though the reports were incomplete and sensational. Monica made the mistake of flipping on a cable news channel, only to see a segment discussing an unaccompanied black minor detained by a security officer for possible ticket fraud. The anchor speculated about whether the girl was the daughter of an influential BFS figure. She hastily turned it off, unsettled by how swiftly her personal nightmare had become national chatter. Half an hour later, Leon emerged from his office, his expression tight. He gently guided Monica away from the TV and asked her, gently, "You all right, sweetheart?"
She gave a small nod. "It's just, I still don't understand."
He didn't even ask any real questions. He just decided I was a liar. Leon placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder.
"I know.
And that's precisely what I'm looking into. There's a formal review starting tomorrow." The next morning, the story had already gone viral. Variations of the headline popped up across social media: "Daughter of BFS secretary harassed at airport." "Young traveler in confrontation over fake ticket." "Is this racial profiling in plain sight?" That last one struck a chord with many readers, igniting heated debates. Some insisted it was a clear case of profiling, while others claimed it might be a misunderstanding or overreaction. Either way, the scrutiny was fierce. Crosswind Regional launched its own internal investigation. Officer Byrne was put on paid administrative leave pending an inquiry. Even as media trucks arrived at his modest apartment building, Byrne refused to speak to reporters. For days, he was bombarded with phone calls from acquaintances and strangers alike. Eventually, he stopped answering altogether. Deep down, Byrne wasn't entirely sure how events had escalated. He had served as a security officer for 11 years, always telling himself he was upholding the highest standards. But there was a voice inside him now, a nagging thought: maybe I never questioned certain biases I had. Maybe I never realized how suspicion could become reflexive when it shouldn't be. And now the consequences were crashing down with impossible force. Meanwhile, Leon Graham's BFS office was a hive of activity. In one conference room, data analysts sifted through complaint records from major airports, noticing patterns that at first glance seemed to confirm that certain groups of travelers were more likely to face heightened scrutiny. In another room, BFS legal advisors consulted with civil rights experts, anticipating lawsuits. Leon stayed on top of each detail, fueled by his determination to see justice done, not only for Monica, but for anyone else who might have been victimized by the same flawed system. Part of the BFS's preliminary report arrived on Leon's desk after a week of frantic investigation. It found concerning irregularities in Crosswind Regional's processes, along with unofficial internal directives that had never been publicly documented. Officer Byrne's record, while not filled with official complaints, showed multiple notes indicating he seemed to single out passengers he deemed suspicious. In many of these cases, superficial markers like clothing or perceived socioeconomic status were the main triggers, rather than anything concrete. The more Leon read, the more his blood boiled. At home, Sylvia Graham checked in on Monica constantly. Their daughter insisted she wanted to keep going to school, to do her homework, to see friends as normal, but it was clear the experience had unsettled her. She was quieter now. Sometimes, she woke in the middle of the night from a dream in which security officers chased her through a labyrinth of airport corridors. Sylvia took to sitting on the edge of Monica's bed late at night, stroking her hair until she fell back to sleep. One particularly stressful afternoon, Leon decided to drive Monica to school himself, wanting a quiet moment to talk. "How are you holding up?" he asked as they turned onto the main road. "Fine," Monica said, a bit too quickly. She stared out the window. "Dad, did I do something wrong by telling him who you are?" I felt like he didn't believe me, but then the second he heard your voice, well, everything changed. Leon's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "You did nothing wrong. And there should never be a scenario where you have to invoke my title just to be treated fairly. The system is supposed to protect you, not interrogate you for no reason." Monica nodded, fiddling with her phone. "Some of my classmates ask me if I feel lucky that you're who you are. But I don't think this is about luck, is it?"
"No," Leon agreed.
"It's about accountability and fairness. And right now, we have a lot of work to do to ensure everyone is treated equally, whether or not they can call a BFS secretary as a parent." Monica was quiet after that, seemingly deep in thought. She thanked her dad for the ride and hopped out, heading into school with her shoulders set in a way that looked more determined than defeated. If you're enjoying this narrative so far, please consider dropping a like, hitting subscribe, and telling me in the comments where you're watching from. Hearing your thoughts and insights really helps keep these stories alive.
Now, let's continue.
By the end of the second week, Monica's story had soared to the top of national headlines, featuring in debates about security protocols and civil liberties. Civil rights organizations began referencing it as an emblematic case, shining light on the suspicion that biased thinking had infiltrated airport procedures. As public scrutiny intensified, the BFS commissioned a full-scale investigation. Leon, wary of mixing his personal grievance with his professional authority, recused himself from direct oversight but made it clear he would not stand in anyone's way should the investigation lead to broad reforms. He brought in a deputy director, Catherine Ortega, known for her fierce commitment to transparency. Catherine's diligence and moral clarity matched Leon's own convictions, and he gave her full autonomy to uncover the truth. Along the way, Catherine's inquiries unearthed testimonies from other travelers, dozens of them, who shared experiences suspiciously similar to Monica's. Many described abrupt questioning, suspicion cast on minor technicalities, and a sense that the airport's security staff perceived them as guilty until proven innocent. Some recounted that they, too, had tickets or IDs questioned when traveling alone or wearing certain attire. One mother, in tears, spoke about how her teen son had been stopped and nearly missed a flight because an officer believed he was using a fake student ID. Another described an older relative asked to empty her carry-on in full view of everyone for no discernible reason. The common thread was a sense of intimidation, often directed at people of color. When Catherine brought these findings to Leon in a confidential briefing, the BFS secretary sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of the situation. "I thought we were doing better than this," he said finally, voice heavy with disappointment. "We all did," Catherine replied. "But from the looks of it, it's not limited to Crosswind. This has been happening at various hubs, though Crosswind might be one of the worst." They both glanced at a photo pinned to the briefing folder, Monica in her bright windbreaker, eyes wide with confusion as she faced Officer Byrne. The security footage had been replayed on countless news segments, turning that single moment into a powerful visual rallying cry. Leon exhaled, recognizing that the crisis was bigger than his family's personal ordeal. It was an institutional failure. Even as the BFS's formal inquiry pressed onward, Monica found her day-to-day life turned upside down. Half the students at her school approached her with random questions, some supportive, some simply nosy. Others spread rumors that her father was using his power to take down entire departments. She discovered that trying to focus in class became harder when she could feel all eyes on her. "I just want to be normal again," she confided to her mother one evening. Sylvia gently brushed a strand of hair from Monica's face.
"I know, sweetie.
Sometimes things happen that change our sense of normal. You did nothing to cause this, but how we respond can shape what our new normal becomes." Monica was quiet for a moment. "I wish I'd asked him why. Why did he think I was lying before I even opened my mouth?"
Sylvia nodded.
"And I don't think any answer he gives would fully satisfy you. This runs deeper, into the assumptions people make about others without realizing it." While Monica navigated the challenges at school, Officer Burns sat in his apartment, grappling with an internal battle that grew more intense each day. Officially, he was under investigation for misconduct and potential civil rights violations. He had never thought of himself as prejudiced, but the evidence, the testimonies, and the swirl of public anger told a different story. The BFS inquiry had begun to pry into his training history, seeking any indication that he or those who taught him had singled out passengers of certain demographics for special scrutiny. The realization left him sick to his stomach. He had once believed he was just following standard protocol. Could it be that the training tips and spot checks he'd absorbed over the years were, in fact, riddled with bias? And if so, had he been enforcing them blindly? Burns' supervisor, Superintendent Halpern, now under mounting pressure herself, made a cryptic phone call to him one evening. "Look, I'm not telling you to do anything unethical," she said, words carefully chosen, "but you should watch out for your own interests. People in higher ranks are going to try to pin this on a handful of individuals if it escalates." Byrne hung up feeling more alone than ever. He already knew the BFS had cast a wide net. Discrimination was not pinned on just one person, but as the incident that ignited a national outcry, his name was at the center of it. If he kept quiet, he might sink under the full weight of public blame. If he cooperated, revealing that systematic profiling was indeed taught informally, he'd be betraying his own circle of colleagues. He spent a sleepless night thinking about the trembling voice of that kid on the phone, telling her father she was scared. And he realized with dawning comprehension that real harm had occurred, not a minor inconvenience, but a lasting fear inflicted on a child. Byrne knew he had to decide which path would let him live with himself. Meanwhile, Leon and Sylvia debated how much they wanted Monica to see of the ongoing coverage. On one hand, they didn't want to shield her from reality. On the other, the 24-hour news cycle threatened to exhaust even the most resilient adult. It was one more reason they decided to keep things as normal as possible at home: family dinners, time set aside to talk about anything but the airport fiasco, and phone calls with relatives about everyday life. All the while, though, the BFS inquiry ground forward. Late one afternoon, Catherine Ortega rushed into Leon's office looking both exhilarated and apprehensive. "Sir, you're not going to believe who just reached out," she said. "Officer Byrne himself." Leon had deliberately avoided direct contact with the man who'd ripped up Monica's boarding pass, trusting the official process to handle it. "Why?" he asked calmly, though inside tension coiled. "He wants to testify," Catherine said, handing over her tablet. "There's a formal request. He's prepared to disclose what he calls unofficial guidelines that encourage officers to profile certain travelers." Leon read through the request, expression sober. "This means he's owning up to at least part of what the BFS is uncovering. Are we prepared to hear him out?"
Catherine nodded. "We have to, sir."
This might be the key to comprehensive reform, not just at Crosswind but nationwide.
He let out a long breath. "All right."
"Proceed carefully but thoroughly." Even as he spoke, he felt a strange swirl of emotions: anger, vindication, and a cautious hope that real change might come from this. The BFS had been trying to project fairness and efficiency, but Byrne's testimony could rip the bandage off institutional problems that had long festered. 3 weeks after the incident, Monica found herself in a meeting with her school's guidance committee, a small group of teachers and administrators. They wanted to discuss whether she felt comfortable addressing the student body about her experience. At first, Monica was startled by the suggestion. She had no desire to stand at a podium and relive that humiliating day. But she also recognized that many of her classmates had questions, not only about her incident but about broader issues of bias and fairness. "I can try," she offered shyly, "as long as it's a small gathering. Maybe just the student council."
The principal agreed. "That would be wonderful, Monica.
Anything you're comfortable sharing can help other students understand the importance of standing up for what's right." At home, Sylvia and Leon were hesitant at first. They wanted to protect her from too much attention. But they also realized that the experience had lit a spark in Monica. She wanted not only to comprehend what had happened to her, but also to help others understand. Eventually, they gave their blessing, with Leon cautioning, "Don't let it turn into a spectacle, okay? You deserve privacy too." Monica promised she would set boundaries. What she didn't mention was the feeling in her gut that no one else should have to endure such a violation of trust and dignity. If her voice, however small, could raise awareness in even a handful of classmates, maybe that would be something. Across town, Officer Byrne was preparing for a very different kind of conversation, an internal hearing where he would give sworn testimony to BFS investigators, all of whom were carefully selected outsiders with reputations for impartiality. The hearing took place in a stark conference room at the BFS field office. Byrne was visibly tense as he took a seat, faced by a panel of 3 investigators. They reminded him that he had the right to remain silent, but if he chose to speak, his words would be on record. He cleared his throat, glanced at the camera recording the session, and spoke. "There are certain patterns officers were expected to notice, unofficially. We were never told to specifically target certain races, but it was implied. Phrases like 'keep an eye on people who don't fit the typical profile of a frequent flyer,' or 'you can usually tell by the way they dress if they're up to something.' Over time, we just learned who was suspicious, or so we thought. I realize now how flawed that was." The investigators asked pointed questions. Who gave those instructions? Were there written materials? Byrne revealed that most of it was passed along verbally by older officers and supervisors, sometimes couched in jokes, sometimes in suggestions like "better safe than sorry." He admitted that he now believed it contributed to systematic discrimination, making them focus on people who looked a certain way. At first, Byrne concluded, his voice shaking slightly, I tried to convince myself that what I did to that girl, Monica, was just me following protocol.
But it wasn't.
It was me relying on assumptions I'd learned and never questioned. His testimony ended with a long silence, broken only by the shuffle of papers. One of the investigators finally spoke. "Thank you for your honesty. We have a lot more work ahead, but this is important information." On a Friday afternoon, Monica stood in the school's modest auditorium in front of about 30 students, mainly the student council members, plus a few curious teachers who'd asked if they could sit in. She wore her yellow windbreaker, which had become a sort of comfort garment despite the painful memory associated with it. Taking a breath, she introduced herself. Everyone, of course, already knew who she was, but the formality gave her the extra second she needed to collect her courage. At the airport, the scariest moment wasn't when the officer yelled, she said, voice echoing softly in the quiet room. It was the instant I realized he'd decided who I was before I could explain myself. After that, it felt like no matter what I said, he was just seeing whatever he wanted to see. She explained how that sense of powerlessness lingered, how it made her question whether people in positions of authority had the right training and checks to prevent bias from overriding fair treatment. Then she asked for questions. A sophomore boy hesitantly raised his hand. "How do you think we, as students, can prevent that kind of bias? We're not in charge of airports." Monica offered a small, reflective smile.
"Maybe not.
But you can speak up if you see someone being mistreated. You can question whether your own assumptions about people are fair. Sometimes it's about having honest conversations, even if they're uncomfortable." The principal, standing at the back, made notes, clearly impressed. Afterward, teachers commended Monica for her bravery. Her best friend, Trish, gave her a tight hug and whispered, "You sounded so sure of yourself. I couldn't have done that." Monica shrugged, feeling both relieved and exhausted. "I wasn't sure of myself at all. But I guess sometimes you do it anyway, because it's important." Meanwhile, with Burns' revelations, plus data from additional employees who stepped forward, the BFS had no choice but to announce a major overhaul of how security officers were trained, supervised, and held accountable. Leon Graham granted a rare press conference in which he explained that the Bureau would implement new strategies focusing on behavior-based assessments, not superficial demographics or assumptions. He emphasized that genuine security depended on rational analysis, not preconceptions that targeted innocent travelers. Not everyone was pleased. Some airports balked at the cost of overhauling their procedures. Certain lawmakers questioned whether the BFS was overreacting to isolated incidents, as they phrased it. In behind-the-scenes negotiations, Leon faced pushback from officials who demanded slower reforms, if any. But Leon, galvanized by the memory of what his daughter had endured, dug in. He refused to sanction any reforms that didn't address the systemic issue. In staff meetings, he insisted that bias was as much a threat to national security as any external danger, because it misdirected resources and undermined public trust. His deputy, Catherine, led the day-to-day building of the new framework. She recruited advisors from civil rights organizations, data analysis firms, and even individuals with backgrounds in law enforcement who'd encountered or fought against discriminatory policies. The BFS hammered out new guidelines on transparency, mandatory bias training, and thorough review processes for passenger complaints. Monica watched these developments with a mix of pride and disbelief. She couldn't help feeling that, somehow, she had sparked a chain reaction that reached far beyond herself. On restless nights, she sat in bed rereading articles about the BFS reforms, sometimes wondering if she wanted to keep speaking out or just fade back into a normal kid's routine. The attention sometimes felt too large, too adult. But then a letter arrived, an actual handwritten letter from a woman named Anita in Chicago, who said she had seen Monica's story on the news and had followed the BFS changes with fascination. Anita described how her own daughter had once been unfairly detained at an airport checkpoint. In the letter, she wrote, "I hope you know that your courage to call your father and stand up for yourself isn't just about your family. It's about all of us who were made to feel small and voiceless at some point. Thank you." Monica read the letter 3 times, tears welling each time. She realized that an experience she wished had never happened could actually help others. It felt contradictory and yet deeply meaningful. 2 months after the incident, Leon Graham's staff contacted Monica with a request from an unlikely source. Officer Byrne wanted the chance to deliver a personal apology. He had stressed it was optional, that he would understand if the Grahams refused, but he felt he owed it to Monica to say the words directly. Sylvia and Leon left the decision to Monica. For a full day, she avoided answering, not sure how she felt. But that evening at dinner, she spoke up. "I want to see him. I have questions." Her father met her eyes. "You know you don't owe him any closure. This is entirely up to you."
She nodded. I know.
I don't think I'm looking for closure for him, I think I need it for me. Arrangements were made for a private meeting in a secure conference room at BFS headquarters. Monica brought both parents, and Byrne arrived alone. The tension in the room was palpable. He looked thinner than the stern, hulking figure she remembered. There was an almost painful remorse in his eyes. I'm not expecting forgiveness, Byrne began, voice trembling slightly. What I did to you was wrong. Whether or not I thought your past was suspicious, ripping it up and humiliating you was inexcusable. I hurt you. Monica stared for a moment, finding her voice. Why didn't you give me a chance to explain that day?
Byrne swallowed.
I got used to letting my instincts, or what I thought were instincts, take over. They weren't instincts, they were biases. And I never questioned them until that moment.
By then, it was too late.
I'm sorry. The silence felt heavier than any words. Leon and Sylvia watched protectively, ready to step in if Monica faltered.
But she pressed on.
I'm glad you're telling the truth about the bigger issues. Because it wasn't just me, right?
He shook his head. No. It wasn't.
But you're the reason I started seeing it for what it was. I'm truly sorry, Monica. She let out a breath, and tears prickled her eyes, though she didn't let them fall. Thank you, she said softly. I'm not saying I forgive you right now. But I am glad you're being honest. The meeting ended with a measure of mutual understanding. Byrne left looking relieved but also visibly shaken. Monica felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, and a small sense of empowerment in having confronted the man who wronged her. She leaned into her mom's shoulder, heart thudding as they walked out of the BFS building. In the following months, the BFS's reforms became a tangible reality, albeit with their own share of growing pains. Officers attended new training seminars emphasizing anti-bias measures. A revised complaint process offered travelers more transparency and a streamlined way to report misconduct. Some critics complained these changes would lead to softened security. Yet early statistics showed that the rate of legitimate safety incidents addressed by BFS staff actually improved, because officers were focusing on genuine red flags rather than superficial assumptions. Monica gradually slipped out of the media spotlight, her story joined by other voices calling for fairer practices in security. She didn't mind that fade. It gave her space to be a seventh grader, to hang out with friends, and to explore her budding interest in photography. But she never forgot what she'd learned, that sometimes you have to speak up, even if you don't feel ready, because staying silent can lead to more harm. A year after her confrontation at the airport, Monica decided to participate in a small community forum organized by local parents. She spoke about how she'd been unsure of herself in that moment of crisis, and how she realized afterward that she possessed more courage than she ever knew. She ended her talk by saying, "We all deserve fair treatment. If you see something wrong, speak up, even if your voice shakes. You might be scared, but someone else might be even more scared or voiceless." As time passed, Leon Graham became a leading figure in an ongoing shift that many considered overdue. Where once BFS had a reputation for rigid procedure, it now strove for transparency, fairness, and moral clarity. Leon's own leadership style evolved too. He commissioned periodic reviews to ensure the reform stuck, not just in theory but in day-to-day practice. His determination was unyielding, fueled by the memory of Monica's trembling voice on that phone call. For her part, Monica got used to seeing references to her story in articles and presentations about BFS. Sometimes it felt surreal, remembering that this national discussion had been catalyzed by her personal nightmare. Yet she also came to see it as a badge of sorts, proof that one individual's experience, even an experience she never asked for, could become a spark for wider change. A year and a half later, a documentary filmmaker approached the Grahams, hoping to feature Monica's experience in a broader narrative about civil rights and security. They agreed, on the condition that Monica's privacy and emotional well-being be prioritized. Monica contributed a short written reflection, read on screen by a narrator, describing how she felt powerless at first, but discovered her voice mattered. The documentary included interviews with BFS officials, activists, and travelers from various walks of life. It gained widespread attention upon release. Throughout all the coverage, the moment that struck the largest chord was Monica's line, "Security without fairness isn't really security at all. It's fear disguised as safety." On social media, people praised the BFS changes, debating how many other institutions needed the same internal reckoning. Soon after the documentary aired, Monica's mother, Sylvia, suggested a family vacation, one free of cameras, interviews, and possibly even stable Wi-Fi. They chose a quiet lakeside cabin. For 2 weeks, they relaxed, canoed, and told stories around a fire. Monica made silly videos of her parents trying to fish and posted them to her private social account, giggling at their clumsy attempts. In that peaceful setting, they could almost forget the chaos that had enveloped them. Yet the reality was, none of them were quite the same as before. On their final day at the cabin, the three of them lounged on a wooden dock, feet dangling over the water. The sun dipped low, casting golden reflections. Monica, gazing at the ripples, murmured, "Sometimes I still have bad dreams about that day." Leon set a hand on her shoulder gently. "I'm sorry you went through that. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right call letting you fly alone. I keep thinking if I'd been more protective, maybe it wouldn't have happened." Monica shook her head. "I would have traveled alone eventually. And it wasn't your fault, Dad." She let out a slow breath. "I'm just glad we turned it into something good for other people." Sylvia tilted her face to the sky. "You did that, Monica. You recognized something wrong and wouldn't back down, even when it was scary. What happened wasn't fair, but you didn't let it break you." Monica felt warmth spread through her chest. She reached for her parents' hands on either side. "Thanks. For believing me and for everything." They sat there in companionable silence, watching the sun descend. Their bond felt stronger, if tempered by the kind of clarity that comes when a family has confronted injustice head-on. Crosswind Regional Airport, where it had all begun, underwent a year-long transformation. The security checkpoint that once served as a backdrop to Monica's ordeal now had improved signage, designated complaint liaisons, and newly installed cameras for transparency. A rotating display near the terminal entrance showcased BFS's new training commitments, featuring statements about impartial security practices and respect for travelers' rights. Officer Byrne, having resigned from Crosswind, quietly began working with a civil rights group that trained law enforcement and security personnel to recognize biases. He didn't publicize his involvement, but over time, word got around that he was offering real insight into how damaging seemingly harmless assumptions could be. Some people saw it as an attempt at redemption, others remained skeptical. Monica's family, informed of his work, felt no immediate need to revisit the topic. They were content to let him walk his own path. Years ticked by. Monica grew into a teenager who excelled in her academics, gravitated towards social justice clubs, and discovered a knack for public speaking. Each time she flew anywhere, whether on a family trip or to a debate competition, she felt a little jolt of memory. The bright yellow windbreaker, though she'd outgrown it, remained in her closet, a reminder of how one day could spark a vast wave of changes. Sometimes she'd run her hand over its fabric and think about how fear had turned into resolve. The BFS maintained its improved policies. While no system is perfect, the shift in approach was undeniable. Complaints dropped in certain categories, while the success rate of identifying genuine security threats rose. Independent oversight committees became a permanent fixture, ensuring accountability. And when new officers joined, they heard about the fiasco that had rocked the Bureau years ago, and how it led to reforms that made everyone safer in the long run. As for Monica, she never set out to become a symbol, but she did become something of a mentor to peers who struggled with issues of discrimination, both in and out of school. As the odd headlines still popped up, "Remember the BFS reforms?" Or looking back at the Monica Albright airport incident, she would smile faintly. She had learned that change, even on a national level, could start with a single voice saying, "This isn't right." Hey folks, if you enjoyed this story of resilience, transformation, and the power one person's voice can hold, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and which part of this journey resonated most with you? Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us continue sharing them with a wider community. Now, let's wrap things up. On a crisp autumn morning, Monica prepared for yet another flight, this time, to visit a college campus as part of a program for promising high school juniors. She'd grown taller, her hair was styled in the latest teenage trend, and her bright yellow windbreaker was long gone, given away to a clothing drive. But she remembered exactly what it felt like to have an officer tower over her, questioning her right to stand where she stood. As she stood at the new checkpoint, looking strikingly different from how it once had, a pleasant TSA agent checked her ID and boarding pass. Monica exhaled, noticing no tension, no suspicious stares. The officer smiled, handed back her documents, and said, "Have a good trip." She offered a grateful nod. "Thank you." Walking through, she thought about the young girl she had been, frightened, humiliated, but determined to call her father and seek help. She thought about the months of turmoil that followed, the revelations, the apologies, and the reforms. Not all scars heal instantly, but she felt stronger for each lesson learned. As she headed toward her gate, her phone buzzed. A text from her father, "Proud of you. Let me know when you land." Mom and I are tracking your flight. Love you. She typed back quickly, love you too. In that quiet moment, Monica marveled at how one person's story, her story, had touched so many. A simple phone call, an outrage that refused to stay hidden, had helped ignite a wave of change. She recognized that progress, though uneven, was still progress. When institutions are called out for injustice, they have a chance to become better, safer, and more accountable. And for Monica, that knowledge was both comforting and empowering. She continued down the corridor, ready to board the plane and step into the next chapter of her life. Ahead lay new experiences, new challenges, and undoubtedly more moments of growth. But she walked forward with confidence, secure in the understanding that a voice raised against what's wrong can help transform the very systems meant to protect us all. In the end, the bright windbreaker had been outgrown, but its symbolism remained. Once, it was a sign of a child's vibrancy in a drab airport. Over time, it became a reminder that sometimes it only takes a determined individual, no matter how young, to reveal the cracks in a system and demand to be fixed. The garment might have been passed on, but the spirit behind it endured. Because justice, as Monica had come to learn, is not merely about punishing those who do wrong. It's about making sure everyone can move forward unafraid, toward the future they deserve. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to say, "Dad, I need you," and refuse to be silenced.